Our next question is actually two folks have submitted very similar questions, so we'll put them together and acknowledge them and their question. From Bill Peace, who we've heard from a little bit earlier on, regarding showing picture ID when voting, what is your position and why? And from Steve Melchiski of Camden, the main Republican Party platform states we should institute secure voter registration and identification systems. Do you support this concept or oppose it? And what is your reasoning for your position? And Chris, we're starting with you.
Perfect. As I said earlier, we have a committee, study commission out right now that Justice Atwood, who used to be the district attorney here in Knox County, so he's someone that many of you may know, is leading. And it is a variety of experts. This is not a partisan initiative. It's something that was asked for by the legislature and the Secretary of State. And his charge is to examine the integrity of the voting system, because I think we all agree that voter integrity and knowing that the system is fair, honest, and working is appropriate. But I wouldn't presuppose what their recommendations might be, and I look forward to seeing that report, which is due out in the first session of the 126th legislature. And I'd like to be there to take that under advisement and act upon it.
Great. Okay. Carol.
I'm really glad to hear about this study because it's something that has come up in my house. My sons, as I mentioned, are in college, and so they're voting by absentee. And when the younger son was home over Columbus Day weekend, he said, "I'm going to go vote." And I said, "Great." And he said, "What do I need to take with me?" I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, I need my license. I need some sort of ID." And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, I don't have to show any proof of my identification." And I said, "No." And he goes, "So I could pretend to be my brother?" And I said, "No." So he went and voted, and my other son is home right now, and he went through the same process. So it's interesting that young people are saying, but I have to show my ID for everything. I'm in college, I have to show my ID, I have to show my ID for everything. Now, I'm not saying that there should be a law or regulation that we have to show our IDs, but I think it's interesting that we're hearing from young people that confusion. I trust our town clerks, and I know they work really hard to maintain the integrity of our voting system. So as I said, I'm looking forward to this study being done, and can't wait to hear what they come up with.
Thank you. John.
Well, that's interesting hearing of your experience, because I have two constituents. One who told me her son went with her husband, with his father, to register to vote here in Rockport, and it just happened to come up that he has a Massachusetts driver's license for.
I didn't say register. I said they went to vote. There's a difference.
Oh, okay.
They weren't registering.
Okay.
They had already registered, and they were just going to vote.
Oh, well, registration
sorry,
and voting is
but I
a
need to-
different. So.
Yeah.
Can you clarify the question then?
Yes, the question is regarding showing your ID when voting.
Okay.
And there is also a question about voter registration and identification systems. So the platform speaks about voter. Could we just stop the clock for a second to give Joan her balance?
Sorry, John.
Main Republican Party staff platform states institute secure voter registration and identification systems. And then there's also regarding showing picture ID when you vote. Was the other question?
Okay. Well, I guess I'd want to separate those two, and maybe, I don't know, I'd like it if maybe we could have a discussion about them differently. But I'm against voter ID when you're going to vote. I think when you have to register, that's another question for me. But I think we don't have fraud problems in this state. The Secretary of State did a study and didn't really find any problems. This whole issue has come up from out of state. This is not a problem that came up within our own state, but it is something that Republican Party is talking about all over the country and pushing as a big issue to, in my opinion, disenfranchise voters. We're a democracy, and voting is our it's the more people we can get to vote, the better we are. So unless we know that we're having some real fraud problems, which we're not in Maine, and we have one of the highest percentages of voter participation, I think we need not do this in our state. And I think we want to do everything we can to encourage voting. Now, I do think when we register to vote, we do need to prove that we are a citizen and of the community where we live. And I know a friend of mine had to have a letter from his landlord showing that in fact he does live where he lives. But I did also hear of a son who went with his father to register to vote, and they wouldn't allow him to register because even though his father said he was living at home, the clerk for some reason wouldn't register him, and the parent was very upset about that.
Ed.
Well, I think we should be basically encouraging people to vote. First of all, Maine does not have a voter problem. I don't think there's any, I haven't heard of very many voter fraud cases in the last 35 years since I lived in Maine. So I don't see a problem there. So we are creating a problem, I think, to deny people the right to vote. It's as simple as that. Because they deny who are the ones they're looking at. They're looking at college kids. They're looking at the poor. Those people tend to vote Democratic. So if we can get those people out of the mix, well, I don't have to say any more. But instead of worrying about voter fraud, we should be encouraging our citizens to get out and vote. We live in a democracy. We pride ourselves in being a democratic nation, and yet we have voter turnouts of 15, 20, 30. The best is probably a little over 50%. We should be worried about the 49 or the 40% who are not getting out to vote. They are the ones we should be saying, look, why are you sitting at home? Get out and do your civic duty. That's the people. We shouldn't be worrying about things that are not there. We shouldn't be creating boogeymen when we have problems of people not voting. So I don't think there's a problem of voter fraud. There's a problem of lack of voting.
Excellent. Thank you. Do we have a question from the floor? Bill, we'll get some cards in again. We will make sure you get heard. I appreciate your civic endeavor. It is wonderful, but we will get through a few more. So any other questions from the floor before I go to a card? And please don't let me forget Bill. He'll never let me forget myself. Ma'am, yes, please.
Hi, Ann Cole, Rockport. Joan mentioned her interest in promoting public education. And I know that the governor has an interest in virtual schools. And I would very much like to hear what each of you thinks about the idea of virtual schools for our students.
And Carl from, Rockport? Rockport, and a question about the candidates' opinions on virtual schools for our students. And we are starting with Carol.
Great, that's a great question. I love the idea of using technology in the classroom. And I think the idea of virtual classrooms just opens up the world for our students in this way. Imagine a very rural school or an island school that cannot offer the level of classes that might be offered at Camden Hills Regional High School, one of the premier schools in the state of Maine. But through virtual classrooms, much like the University College system uses with ITV, video conferencing, a student on the islands can participate in classes being offered at Camden Hills High School, or somebody from the county could be participating, or vice versa. So it opens up these opportunities for learning that students have never had before. Now, another way of looking at using technology in virtual classrooms is that the traditional model of teaching is for a teacher to present a concept, send her students home, they do the homework, apply to that concept, and hopefully they remember what the lesson was about. With block scheduling, they may have had a delay of 2 or 3 days. But if we reversed it and said, hey, go home, watch this YouTube video on this lesson, and then when you come in, you've already had some background information on this lesson, and the teacher is going to take it and work with them so that there's not that problem at home with homework and stress, self-esteem that comes from not understanding what's going on in the classroom, but you've used virtual classrooms to support you. Virtual classrooms are not a substitute for live teachers. They're not a substitute for good education. They're a tool like many tools used in a teacher's toolbox.
Great. Joan.
I am very supportive of the use of technology within classrooms. And I think there's room in a classroom with a teacher present to be using some virtual tools. I like the idea of kids going home and looking at YouTubes or things like that, but having the teacher be the guider and the helper to interpret those things. What I worry about, my 13-year-old grandson said to me a while back, he says, I don't think I really want to go away to college. He's kind of a home guy, and he says, I think I'll just get it online. I'll just get my college degree online. My daughter really about dropped dead when I told her he'd said this. But I mean, what my worry is that people are not going to have the kind of experience that they can get with interaction through with others. And I know the university system is using a virtual system in many cases, which I think is a very good one for special circumstances, but there's nothing like interaction with your colleagues in a class and interaction with the teacher. Certainly in our K through 12 system, I would not want to see it used as a replacement for attending classes and being responsible to a classroom situation. I know homeschooling may want to use some of this, and I'm not sure how that would work. I would have concerns about it.
Right. Ed.
Being a teacher for most of my adult life, I find that the classroom is very important. It brings a child into a position where has to share time with other students. He learns social skills. They learn how to interact with one another. Virtual schools or virtual lessons can be done on a limited basis, but not at the expense of a regular public education. I think schools are vastly important. This is where people develop their skills for life. I know there's problems in education, but the virtual school is not the answer. It's running away from the problems rather than facing the problems and improving our school systems. So no, I am not in favor of virtual schools. I think limited use of that may be part of a lesson plan. I know I did that when I was teaching, but I taught the traditional classroom on a daily basis. And so I'm not in favor of doing away with public schools or schools in general and having a kid watch TV and say he's going to learn something. To me, I don't know about that. I question it.
I'm outflanked by teachers on either side, and I'm not an education expert, but I want to tell you that with my work on the Many Flags project that started about 9 years ago, realizing that if we were going to have a successful economy here in the Mid-Coast, we needed to provide educational opportunity in a very different way than we were offering it now, I became involved in education in a host of ways. I think it's pretty hard for us to guess what the use of technology and virtual classrooms might be over the next 2, 5, 10, 20 years. I think it's just beyond our comprehension how we're going to be able to use technology in terms of education. And I want to make sure that we're open to those ideas. In the Many Flags efforts, as we brought together administrators from all the sending schools to the Mid-Coast School of Technology, we have been having for the last year a new conversation. And that conversation is about common scheduling, which if you think it's hard to get a bill through the legislature, you ought to try and get a variety of different high schools to share a common schedule so that they then could share virtual or technological sharing of classes. That's one of the things that we're working on so that we can take full advantage of learning opportunities that are involved in all the many high schools in this area. So common scheduling, curriculum mapping, so that we know where our expertise lies in each of those schools, and we aren't duplicating efforts. We're looking for ways that we can share and expand upon the efforts that each of our students get. I think there's some great, great lessons out there. One of the best might be the 13 unbridged islands, the residential islands, 3 of which I represent in North Haven, Vinyl Haven, and Matinicus. Do you know they have a common student council among all the islands? That's how commonly they have integrated their school system. A common student council the kids run for, and they share classes and they share learning together. So there are great opportunities even for teamwork in a virtual way.